The Telegraph Operator's Choice by Evelyn Merrick. The sharp staccato of Morse code filled the cramped telegraph office as Adelaide Morrison's fingers danced across the brass key with practiced precision. 3 years of working the line between Denver and San Francisco had given her a reputation for speed and accuracy that rivaled any operator west of the Mississippi. But today, as she transcribed the urgent message about delayed supply trains, her concentration wavered at the sound of familiar spurs jingling across the wooden boardwalk outside. Through the frost-etched window, she watched Marshal Cole Bennett dismount from his bay gelding, his movements betraying the weariness that came from 2 weeks tracking cattle rustlers through the Colorado Territory. Even beneath the layer of trail grime, his imposing figure commanded attention. Broad shoulders that filled his worn leather vest, dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of storm clouds that seemed to see everything. Adelaide's pulse quickened despite her determination to remain professional. 6 months had passed since their last heated exchange about the safety of her position. 6 months since he'd declared her work too dangerous for a woman, and she'd responded by threatening to wire his superiors about his interference with federal communications. The telegraph key fell silent under her trembling fingers. "Miss Morrison." Cole's voice carried that familiar blend of respect and exasperation as he stepped through the door, removing his hat. "I need to send an urgent wire to the territorial marshal in Cheyenne." "Of course, Marshal Bennett." Adelaide kept her tone crisp and businesslike, though she couldn't help but notice how the afternoon light streaming through the window highlighted the new lines of fatigue around his eyes. "Please dictate your message." Cole approached the counter, his presence filling the small space. "Tell Marshal Williams we've recovered the stolen cattle and captured 3 of the rustlers. The 4th man, Jake Morrison, escaped toward the border. We'll continue pursuit at first light." Adelaide's hand froze above her pad. "Morrison." The name fell from her lips in barely more than a breath. "You know the name?" Cole's eyes sharpened with professional interest. It's my father's surname. The admission cost her, but she forced herself to meet his gaze, though I haven't seen him in 8 years. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Adelaide had never discussed her family with anyone in Millfield, and the careful way Cole was studying her face suggested he was reassessing everything he thought he knew about the composed telegraph operator. 8 years is a long time, he said finally, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. "Long enough for a man to change his ways." Adelaide lifted her chin defiantly. "Or to prove he never will." Cole leaned against the counter, his weathered hands resting near hers. "The Jake Morrison we're tracking has been rustling cattle across 3 territories. He's got a scar running from his left temple to his jaw and rides a distinctive paint horse with white markings." Adelaide's breath caught. She remembered that scar, the result of a saloon fight when she was 14, one of many that had convinced her mother to pack their meager belongings and disappear one night while her father was sleeping off a drinking bout. "Send the message," she managed, her professional training overriding the turmoil in her chest. Cole studied her face for a long moment before nodding. "There's more. Add that Morrison was heard bragging about having family in these parts. Tell Williams we may need to consider protective custody for potential targets." The irony wasn't lost on her. The very marshal who'd spent months arguing she needed protection was now offering it, because of the father she'd spent years running from. Adelaide began tapping out the message, each dot and dash a small act of defiance against the chaos threatening to overwhelm her carefully ordered world. When she finished, Cole placed several coins on the counter. "Adelaide." The sound of her given name in his deep voice made her look up. "I need to ask you some questions about your father. I've told you everything relevant to your investigation." "Have you?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell leather and sage and something uniquely masculine that made her pulse race. "Because the woman I've watched handle every crisis in this town with perfect composure just went pale as winter snow at the mention of a name." Adelaide straightened her shoulders, calling upon the same strength that had carried her through years of uncertainty. "My personal history has no bearing on your official duties, Marshal?" "Maybe not, but it might have bearing on your safety." The words hung between them like a challenge. Adelaide had spent years building walls around herself, creating a life where she depended on no one and no one could disappoint her. The idea of accepting protection from Cole Bennett, a man who'd already proven he could unravel her defenses with a single look, terrified her more than any threat her father might pose. "I don't need protection," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Cole's laugh held no humor. "That's what you said when the Hartley gang was robbing stages between here and Boulder, and when those drifters were causing trouble at the saloon. And when you decided I was too fragile to handle my own responsibilities," Adelaide interrupted, old anger flaring. "I've been taking care of myself since I was 16, Marshal. I won't stop now." 16. The number seemed to hit him like a physical blow. "You've been alone since you were 16. Adelaide realized her mistake too late. She'd revealed far more than she'd intended. And the look in Cole's eyes had shifted from professional concern to something deeper and more personal. "That's not your concern." She began organizing papers on her desk, needing something to do with her hands. "If you have no other official business, I have work to complete before the evening transmission." But Cole didn't move. Instead, he walked around the counter, something he'd never done before, and stood beside her chair. The Telegraph office suddenly felt impossibly small. "Adelaide, look at me." The quiet command in his voice compelled her to obey. When she turned, she found herself trapped between his gaze and the wall, close enough to see the flecks of green in his gray eyes. "Why did you come here?" he asked. "To Millfield, I mean. Why choose this place?" The question caught her off guard. The position was available. I had the necessary skills. "That's not what I'm asking." His voice dropped lower, more intimate. "A woman with your abilities could work in any major city. Better pay, more opportunities. Instead, you chose a small mining town where the biggest excitement is usually a disputed claim or a Saturday night brawl. Why?" Adelaide felt exposed, as if he could see through all her carefully constructed defenses. "Perhaps I prefer the quiet life. Or perhaps you were running from something, someone." The accuracy of his observation stole her breath. She'd chosen Millfield precisely because it was small and remote, a place where a woman could disappear and reinvent herself. But Cole's perception cut through her pretense like a blade through silk. "We're all running from something, Marshal," she said finally. "Are we?" He reached up, his fingers barely brushing her cheek. "What are you running from, Adelaide?" The touch was feather light, yet it sent tremors through her entire body. She should step away, maintain the professional distance that had served her well for 3 years. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch. "Disappointment," she admitted, the word escaping before she could stop it. "Betrayal. The kind of love that destroys everything it touches." Cole's thumb traced along her jawline, and she saw understanding dawn in his eyes. "Your father. He was charming when he was sober. Told beautiful stories, made grand plans, promised us the world." Adelaide's voice grew stronger as she spoke, fueled by years of buried pain. "But he was drunk more often than not, and his promises were as empty as his pockets. My mother and I learned not to trust anything he said." "And now you don't trust anything anyone says." The observation struck home with painful accuracy. Adelaide had indeed learned to rely only on facts, on things she could verify and control. Emotions were dangerous, unpredictable variables that led to poor decisions and broken promises. "Trust is a luxury I can't afford," she said. Cole's hand moved to cup her face fully, his touch warm and steady. "What if I told you that you could afford it with me?" The words hung between them, loaded with possibility and risk. Adelaide's analytical mind immediately began cataloging all the reasons why such trust would be foolish. His dangerous profession, the likelihood that he would eventually move on to a larger town, the simple fact that men like Cole Bennett didn't stay with women like her. But her treacherous body was responding to his nearness, to the warmth of his skin, and the way his eyes seemed to see straight through to her soul. "You don't know me," she managed. "I know you're the strongest woman I've ever met," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know you've kept this town connected to the outside world through blizzards and floods and outlaw raids. I know you've never asked anyone for help, never shown fear, never backed down from a challenge. You don't know about my father. I know you're nothing like him." Cole's interruption was firm, absolute. "A man who abandons his family is a coward. A woman who builds a new life with her own hands is a warrior." Adelaide felt something crack inside her chest, some wall she'd spent years building. "Cole." The sharp clatter of the telegraph key interrupted her. An incoming message demanded immediate attention, and Adelaide reluctantly pulled away from Cole's touch to transcribe the dots and dashes. As she worked, she was acutely aware of Cole's presence behind her. The way he stood close enough to offer support without interfering with her duties. When she finished transcribing the routine weather report, she turned to find him watching her with an expression she'd never seen before, something that looked remarkably like admiration mixed with affection. "You're incredible," he said simply. The compliment, delivered without flowery language or elaborate gestures, affected her more than any of her father's grand pronouncements ever had. There was no artifice in Cole's words, no hidden agenda or selfish motive. "Marshal Bennett." "Cole," he corrected. "My name is Cole." The simple correction felt like an invitation to intimacy that both thrilled and terrified her. "Cole, then. What happens when you catch my father?" The question brought reality crashing back between them. Cole's expression grew serious, professional. "That depends on several factors. If he comes quietly, if he cooperates with the investigation, if he shows genuine remorse for his actions. And if he doesn't." Cole's silence was answer enough. They both knew that cattle rustling was a hanging offense in most territories, and Jake Morrison had apparently made a career of it. "I see." Adelaide turned back to her Telegraph, seeking refuge in the familiar rhythm of work. "Then I suppose we should focus on your investigation rather than other matters." But Cole moved closer instead of backing away. "Adelaide, whatever happens with your father, it doesn't change anything between us." "There is nothing between us," she protested, though the words lacked conviction. "Isn't there?" His voice was quiet, but she could hear the challenge beneath the surface. "When you thought I might have been hurt during the Hartley incident, you sent 5 different messages to surrounding towns looking for information about my whereabouts." Adelaide's cheeks flamed. She'd thought no one had noticed her frantic attempts to locate him when he'd failed to return from what should have been a routine patrol. "I was concerned about law enforcement coverage for the town," she said weakly. "Were you? And when Mrs. Patterson was spreading gossip about the new schoolteacher, you defended my character so fiercely that she didn't dare repeat her speculation about my past." Adelaide had forgotten about that incident, but Cole clearly hadn't. She'd been incensed by the woman's baseless insinuations about Cole's motives for remaining unmarried at 32. "I don't tolerate gossip in my presence," she said. "And when I was recovering from that knife wound last month, you appeared at my door every evening with hot meals and fresh bandages, despite the fact that Doc Martin was perfectly capable of handling my care." Each accusation was true, and Adelaide found herself backed into a corner of her own making. She had cared for Cole, had worried about him, had defended him, all actions that contradicted her claims of professional detachment. "I was being neighborly," she said, but the argument sounded hollow even to her own ears. Cole stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "Adelaide Morrison, you are many things, but neighborly isn't one of them. You're polite, professional, efficient, and competent, but you keep everyone at arm's length, everyone except me." The accuracy of his observation stole her breath. It was true she had made exceptions for Cole, had allowed him past defenses that had kept everyone else at bay. "Why do you think that is?" he asked softly. Adelaide's mind raced for a logical explanation, but the truth was simpler and more frightening than any analysis she could construct. "I don't know," she admitted. "I do." Cole's hands found her waist, steadying her. "It's because you trust me, even when your mind tells you not to. It's because you care about me, even when you're determined not to care about anyone." The words hit her like a physical blow because they were undeniably true. Despite all her carefully constructed defenses, despite her determination to remain independent, she had developed feelings for the stubborn Marshal, who'd spent months trying to protect her from dangers she insisted didn't exist. "Cole, I can't." "Can't what?" "Can't trust your own feelings? Can't believe that someone might want to stay?" His thumb traced circles on her waist, and she felt her resolve weakening. "I'm not your father, Adelaide. I don't make promises I can't keep." "How do I know that?" The question came out as barely more than breath. "Because I'm not asking you to take my word for anything. I'm asking you to judge me by my actions." Cole's voice grew stronger, more confident. "I've been in Millfield for 18 months. In that time, have I ever broken my word to you? Have I ever failed to keep a commitment?" Adelaide considered his question seriously. In their professional interactions, Cole had indeed proven reliable. When he said he would investigate a complaint, he did. When he promised to increase patrols during times of unrest, he followed through. When he gave his word about anything, large or small, he kept it. No, she admitted, you haven't. Then trust that when I tell you I want to stay here, in Millfield with you I mean exactly what I say. The declaration hung between them, simple and direct and terrifying in its honesty. Adelaide felt the walls she'd spent years building begin to crumble, not from force, but from the gentle persistence of a man who saw through her defenses to the woman beneath. What are you saying? She asked, though she suspected she already knew. I'm saying I love you, Adelaide Morrison. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you handle every crisis with perfect composure. I love that you've built a life for yourself from nothing, that you've never needed anyone to rescue you because you're perfectly capable of rescuing yourself. The words should have terrified her. Instead, they filled her with a warmth she'd never experienced before, a sense of being truly seen and valued for who she was rather than who someone wanted her to be. I love that you argue with me when you think I'm wrong, Cole continued, his voice growing rougher with emotion. I love that you've never once tried to change me or make me into someone I'm not. I love that you challenge me to be better while accepting exactly who I am right now. Adelaide felt tears in her eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming relief of finally hearing words that matched actions, promises that came with proof. Cole, she began, but he wasn't finished. I'm not asking you to give up your independence or your work or anything that makes you who you are. I'm asking if you might consider building something new with me, a partnership between equals, a love between two people strong enough to stand on their own but choosing together. The proposal was everything she'd never dared to hope for and everything she'd been too afraid to want. It offered love without possession, partnership without domination, commitment without sacrifice of self. What about my father? She asked, grasping for practical concerns to ground herself. We'll face that together, whatever happens. Your past doesn't define your future, Adelaide. Only your choices can do that. Adelaide looked into Cole's storm-gray eyes and saw patience, understanding, and a love that didn't demand she become someone else to deserve it. For the first time in her adult life, she felt safe enough to be vulnerable. I'm frightened, she admitted. Of me? Of hoping? The confession cost her, but Cole's expression only grew more tender. Then let me hope for both of us until you're ready to hope for yourself. Adelaide felt the last of her resistance crumble. This man had seen her at her most defensive, most stubborn, most independent, and still wanted to build a life with her. He wasn't asking her to change or to need him, he was simply offering to want her exactly as she was. I love you too, she said, the words feeling strange and wonderful on her lips. I think I have for months, but I was too afraid to admit it, even to myself. Cole's smile transformed his entire face, erasing the lines of weariness and replacing them with joy. You're the bravest woman I know, Adelaide Morrison. But you don't have to be brave alone anymore. When he kissed her, it was with the reverence of a man who understood the gift he was being given, not submission or surrender, but trust freely offered by a woman who'd every reason to keep it locked away. Adelaide melted into his embrace, finally allowing herself to believe that she'd found something rare and precious, a love that strengthened rather than weakened, that built up rather than tore down, that promised a future neither could achieve alone. The telegraph key began chattering with another incoming message, but for once in her professional career, Adelaide ignored it. Some things she was learning were more important than duty. Some promises were worth the risk of believing. When they finally broke apart, Cole rested his forehead against hers. So what happens now? Adelaide smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. Now we send that message to Marshal Williams. We deal with whatever comes with my father. And then, she paused, surprised by her own boldness. Then we see what we can build together. I like that plan, Cole said, his voice warm with affection. Though I have one addition. What's that? When this business with your father is settled, would you consider becoming my wife? I know it's fast, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Adelaide felt her breath catch, but this time it wasn't from fear. Ask me again in a week, she said, when we know what we're facing. But Cole? She reached up to touch his cheek. The answer will be yes. Cole's kiss this time was deeper, filled with promise and hope and the kind of love that could weather any storm. When the telegraph began chattering again, Adelaide reluctantly pulled away, but she kept one hand in Cole's as she returned to work. Outside, the Colorado afternoon was fading into evening, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Inside the small telegraph office, Two people who had spent years protecting themselves from disappointment finally opened their doors to possibility, ready to face whatever the future might bring together. The message Adelaide transcribed was routine, a supply manifest from Denver, but as she worked, she found herself smiling. For the first time in her adult life, the future felt like something to anticipate rather than something to survive. And when Cole squeezed her free hand, she squeezed back, no longer afraid to hold on to something precious. After all, some risks were worth taking, especially when you weren't taking them alone.